At this point in the evening, the Camp Hanover staff is going to continue with their orientation, but we're very pleased to introduce Jed Koball and pass it off to him. Jed Koball is serving as a mission co-worker in Peru with the Joining Hands Network, which is an initiative of the Presbyterian Hunger Program to address the root causes of hunger in countries with high rates of poverty. Red Uniendo Manos Peru, as the mining industry, the water crises, and especially as all of these things are connected to climate change and trade policies that disadvantage many Peruvians. Jed grew up in Virginia, where we are, as well as Arkansas, and served as a young adult volunteer in Philippines before attending seminary and becoming an ordained teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church. He served a congregation in New York and a non-government organization in Nicaragua before being appointed to his current post in Peru in 2009. I got to meet Jed in 2014 as part of a Presbyterian Hunger Program delegation to Peru when the COP20 meeting was there. And I was absolutely in awe of Jed's amazing ways of connecting and empowering people to deal with the difficult environmental issues in that region. So our staff is going to head out and I will mute them, but I pass it off to you, Jed.
Thanks, Colleen. Am I now on the screen?
Yep, you're all set, Jed. We can hear you great.
Okay, you're looking at me.
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'm gonna switch to my screen then, and just let me know if it doesn't work. Oops. Are you seeing my screen?
No.
Oh.
There we go.
How about now?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Colleen. It was a very sweet introduction. And thank you, Abby and Matt, and any others who are part of the organizing of this. But thank you for this invitation. It's really special to be with you in this way from here in Lima, Peru, where I've got a fleece jacket on because we are in the middle of winter down here. And I'm very much in envy of your warm sun up there. But you all do look a little bit hot and a little bit tired. Fortunately, I can't really see you, so if you fall asleep, don't worry. I'm not going to be offended. But I'm very excited to have any chance to be able to share the story of our partners here in Peru. My wife, Jenny, she cannot be with us this evening, but she's also a mission coworker. She's a Peruvian herself, and she coordinates the Young Adult Volunteer Program here in Peru. So if any folks out there are interested in that, you can certainly be in touch with her. She'd love to tell you all about that. But I'm going to share a little bit of the story of our partners and our friends here in Peru and their struggle to live in harmony with the earth. And the story I'm going to begin. Okay, now I've got to figure out how to control my screen. Oh, there we go. All right, there we go. Our story begins about 5 years ago. And this is a photo of the beginning of a march, a walk, kind of like your own. This is in the northern part of Peru, a place called Cajamarca, high up in the Andes Mountains. And in Cajamarca, a little over 5 years ago, folks from the community there were worried about a lagoon that was being threatened by a mining project. And so they began a march from Cajamarca to the capital here in Lima. It was a march of about 520 miles, which if my math isn't wrong, that is roughly the distance of Louisville to St. Louis and then back again. So they did a march of approximately twice as long as what you're doing, I think, but we're not comparing. But they began their march to call attention to the issue of the threat against their lagoon. And the march caught on. And communities from all over the Andes and the Amazon began to organize their own marches so that they would all come together in Lima. They were coming from Iquitos, deep in the jungle, to Arequipa in the southern part of the Andes, places where water was being threatened by mining, by oil, by many other industries that work in their communities. And eventually, they did arrive to here in Lima, and tens of thousands of us joined in Lima in front of the Congress to stand up for water and for life. Now, it was kind of a special and momentous time to have all of these folks coming together, standing up on behalf of water. And if we try to figure out what was really behind all of that, how it all kind of came together, starting with this one little march from Cajamarca, we have to go back further than just 5 years ago when it started. If we really want to understand what was behind all this momentum, we need to go back about 500 years. In 1514, King Ferdinand of Spain is supposedly said, get gold, humanely if possible, but gold. And therein started the first gold rush. Cortez was the main figure there, going into North America and finding gold up there. And his second cousin, Francisco Pizarro, he took hold of this gold rush, and he made his way towards Peru. Now, when he got to Peru, what he found was one of the most biologically diverse places in the entire world. Peru is roughly twice the size of Texas, but it's got over 80% of the world's ecosystems and climate zones just here. A lot of people refer to Peru as God's little laboratory because you can find just about everything right here in Peru. And certainly that was attractive to Pizarro and the Spanish royalty. But what they were really after, of course, was the gold. And there was plenty of gold here in Peru. And the Incas, the empire present here at that time, used that gold in a lot of its rituals and ceremonies. And Pizarro had a strategy where he was going to go and meet one of the Incas, one of the leaders of the Incas, whose name was Atahualpa. And the legend of Atahualpa and Pizarro goes something like this. So Atahualpa was in Cajamarca, the very place from that first photo. And Pizarro made his way up into the Andes with his small band of, a few dozen folks to meet Atahualpa. And they came together in the center of the community. And there, Atahualpa and Pizarro stood face to face, and next to Pizarro was a Spanish priest. And he offered Atahualpa a gift. He offered him a Bible. Well, the Incas didn't have a written language, and they had likely never seen a book before. So Atahualpa took the Bible, and again, the story goes, he smelled it, he touched it, some say he even tasted it, and then he threw it on the ground because it was the worst tasting offering he'd ever received in his life. But in return, he offered a gift to Pizarro. He offered him chicha, which is a corn-based drink that sometimes gets fermented. And Pizarro took a sip of that and spit it on the ground. And there ended all the formalities and niceties between Atahualpa and Pizarro. And at that point, Pizarro had Atahualpa held captive. So Atahualpa is imprisoned, and the Incas, the people, want to get him free with a ransom. And so they offer a room full of gold to Pizarro for Atahualpa's freedom. Well, Pizarro takes the room full of gold, and then he has Atahualpa executed. And therein begins the next several hundred years of Spanish occupation, what is today known as Peru. In that very same area of Cajamarca today, where Atahualpa was killed, there is a gold mining project. It is the largest gold mining project in the world, worth over more than $4 billion. And it has literally removed mountaintops which are sacred to many of the indigenous populations because they offer protection. And they often also, and so that same community who started that march 5 years ago continues to hold vigil around the lagoon that they are protecting. Their march did make a difference. To this day, the mining project has been stalled. It has not continued, so their water continues to be clean in this community, but there is always a threat at any time that this project will get approved to move forward. In the meantime, the people continue to hold vigil. But it's not just Cajamarca, it's the entire country. Throughout the Andes Mountains, Peru has one of the highest potentials for mining production in the entire world. It is first in the world in silver production, second in zinc, third in many others. You can read the list there. In Latin America, it is one of the top producers of all of these many different metals and minerals. And so it is highly attractive to investors around the world. And Bill Gates, who's done many, many wonderful things with his fortune over the years, was in conversation with the country of Spain a few years ago about providing aid to Peru and countries like Peru. And he said to the government of Spain, you know, all lives have equal value, but we can change many more things in poor countries than when you aid to a country like Peru with middle income, because Peru just has to exploit its resources. And if it did, it could be as rich as any European country. So the philosophy that exists from many, many folks in the world, good folks, is that the exploitation of the earth is the pathway to prosperity. And so the potential is tremendous here in Peru for a lot of wealth and prosperity. The blue dots on this map show the potential mining areas throughout the Andes Mountains. The Andes run like a spine right through the middle of the country. And so it is full of gold and silver and so many other types of metals. But if we're really to understand the threat of this, of mining to communities like in Cajamarca, we have to be able to see a cross-section of that map, not just the bird's eye view. Peru has the Pacific Ocean there on the left, and the Andes quickly rise up. It's up to above 20,000 feet. And then on the other side, they are the Amazon, all these ecosystems within there. But it's on the top of those mountains is where water is born, is what they'll say here in Peru. With all of these snow caps on top of the Andes Mountains and the lagoons that are formed by them. There are over 12,000 lagoons running through the Andes Mountains. And here, back to the bird's eye view of Peru, this is a map of all the headwaters throughout the Andes. This is where water for Peru. What flows down to the west is ultimately water for here in Lima, which is the second biggest city, desert city in the world. There's 11 million people living here, and we're in the middle of a desert. All of our water flows down from the Andes Mountains, which begins with those ice caps. And then what flows in the other direction forms the Amazon River and the Amazon Basin. So you have the map of all the mining potential, where all the gold, the silver, the tin, the copper is. And then you have a map of all the headwaters. So all that gold and silver is right underneath all those 12,000 lagoons that people are dependent on. And here is the map of the actual concessions. That is land that has been conceded by the government to investors in mining to be able to explore that land. You can see it overlaps exactly where all the water is. And then this is a map of social conflicts in Peru. Areas where there are conflicts between a community and the state, or the community and a company. The red areas are where there are more conflicts and more intense conflicts. And again, you can see how that map corresponds to the map of the mining. Now, I know your walk here is with regard to fossil fuels, not necessarily mining industry, but fossil fuels are very much a part of what are happening here in Peru as well. It's not just about gold and silver, it's about oil too. And so today, it's not just about getting gold humanely if possible, it's about getting oil as well, but at all costs, getting oil. When I arrived here to Peru in 2009, in June of that year, actually June 5th, 9 years ago yesterday, there was a huge conflict in what is in a place called Bagua in the Amazon of Peru. This conflict was started with a protest by the indigenous populations of the Amazon, who all came together because they were protesting a trade agreement between the US and Peru that had just been implemented. And they were protesting it because in order for that trade agreement to take effect, Peru had to make certain legislative concessions to the US. It had to weaken certain environmental regulations and also weaken certain land rights for indigenous populations. And so the indigenous folks in the Amazon protested by blocking a highway. And they physically put their bodies on the highway for weeks on end until this protest began to get some international attention. And the US at that time was feeling threatened by the attention it was getting. And the State Department, this was June of 2009, sent an email to Peru, the Peruvian government. And this email was discovered, was printed on WikiLeaks. And in that email from the US State Department, they wrote, should the Congress of Peru and President Garcia, the president of Peru at that time, give in to the pressure of the indigenous protesters, there would be implications for the recent implemented Peru-US free trade agreement. And later it went on to say, the Peruvian government's reluctance to use force to clear roads and blockades is contributing to the impression that the indigenous communities have broader support than they actually do. 2 days after that email was sent, the Peruvian authorities unleashed a series of gas bombs followed by bullets, and dozens of the indigenous protesters were killed right there in the street. So here you have today the map of all the mining concessions in the Andes Mountains, all the land, which is approximately 16, almost 17% of the national territory has been concessioned for mining projects. And then over here, the map on the right is a map of all the oil concessions in the Amazon jungle. Over 75% of the land of the Amazon in Peru has been concessioned off for oil exploration. But again, it's in the name of prosperity. And President Obama, who came here at the very end of his term, had developed great relationships with Peru and did many wonderful things. But he noted that Peru has become the world's envy due to its outstanding economic growth in the last decade. And the macro numbers, the big numbers, will tell you the same thing. The economy has grown substantially over the last 10, 15 years. and certain poverty rates have declined over the last 10 to 15 years. But the question is, at what cost, and at whose cost? As of this past month, there are over 200 registered social conflicts in Peru. And of these conflicts, over 60% are directly related to the extractive industry, meaning oil and mining. And those are industries that in the Andes Mountains, in the Amazon jungle, and places that are occupied primarily by indigenous populations. And as far as the economic growth, that too can be debated. Yeah, there is a lot of money, and you can see it here in Lima. The fact that I've got great internet access, I live in a really stable building. I have all the commodity, all the things that make life so comfortable you can find here in Lima. A really strong growing middle class. But once you're outside of Lima, you're going to see extreme poverty, and especially in the areas where the indigenous populations are living in the Andes Mountains, as well as going into the Amazon jungle. All of this here in Peru is attributed to what is called the perro hortelano, or the dog in the barn syndrome is what it's called here, literally the dog in the orchard syndrome. And effectively what happened wasn't about 10 years ago, said on television at the time of the conflict in Bagua, he said the problem is the dogs of the orchard, or the dogs of the barn. And he was referring to the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and the Andes. He said dogs guarding the orchard, guarding the barn, standing over top of the food, growling, not letting anyone else touch it, even while they don't eat it themselves. Effectively saying, in this cartoon on the upper left, you dogs come, you send your dogs and you're hungry yourself. Well, I'm gonna welcome my my brothers, the investors. Or down here, the cartoon saying, welcome to all my business friends. Don't pay any attention to the dogs of the orchard, the ones who are protesting outside, the indigenous peoples taking to the streets. Because just because they don't eat and they don't want to let anyone else eat, that's the issue is theirs. In effect, he's saying the reason they're poor is because they choose to be poor, and then they don't want anyone else to have anything either. So they stand in the streets blocking access to our natural resources, our gold, our silver, our oil, that we can use for our development here in Lima. Today, the protests have not subsided, as the conflicts around the country indicate, but it has made Peru one of the most dangerous places in the world for environmentalists or for defenders of the environment. Latin America in general is considered to be the most dangerous place in the world for environmentalists. This is a map showing the hotspots of environmental defenders of the environment. So throughout Latin America, particularly now in the Amazon, there's tremendous threat to anyone standing up to the industries, and particularly the mining, oil, and logging, which I haven't even got into in the Amazon. The industries and the demand for their products, which quite honestly we are all complicit in some form or another, and which at the end of the day is effectively a significant statement in your walk to the General Assembly. The PCUSA's demand for products through its own investment in fossil fuel industry. But it also is attributed to just tremendously weak environmental laws and land rights of indigenous peoples. Some of this brought on by the governments themselves, some of this imposed upon governments by a larger agenda, oftentimes coming from the US. And those who are most impacted are the indigenous peoples, the indigenous leaders in particular who are standing up. They are quite literally being assassinated. And in the midst of all of this, we have Peru as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. Those mountaintop peaks where water is formed, here in Peru, they contain 70% of the world's tropical glaciers. So all the glaciers in the world found within the tropical regions, 70% of them are here in Peru, and they're all melting. All of them that are below 5,000 meters above sea level will completely disappear within about 15 years. There's no turning back on that. There's nothing we can do to stop that. They are gone. And they are the source of water for all of Peru, beginning with the farming communities in the Andes Mountains, who depend on those lagoons and the rivers that flow off of them for their livelihoods. So once again, those most impacted by the environmental stress, the assault on the earth, are the indigenous populations in the Andes and the Amazon. In effect, this assault didn't begin 5 years ago or 10 years ago. This is an assault that began at least 500 years ago, an assault on indigenous peoples, the conquest for their land, for their natural resources, the destruction of their life and livelihood. But at the core of it all, I'm convinced that this is a deeply, deeply spiritual issue. At the core of the assault on the indigenous peoples for 500 years to this very day, as represented in the syndrome of the dog in the barn, this is a spiritual issue, because at the core of the conquest is the suppression of Andean and Amazonic spirituality that is rooted in harmonious living with the earth. There are, in effect, two ways to develop in this world, and they both are connected to our relationship with the earth. Are we going to see the earth as our object to be owned and exploited to create prosperity? Or are we going to see the earth as our brother, our sister, with which we must live in harmony? For the last 500 years, we have most definitely been going down the first path. And so I'm convinced what will define our existence as a human race in this century going forward is deeply rooted in our relationship with the earth. It is related to how we are going to live with the earth and live with others who are defending the earth. Because those most impacted by the human assault on the earth are the ones who are most capable of actually leading us to more harmonious and sustainable living, which in my opinion is not really all that distant from what the ancient Hebrew texts have told us, as we heard in Isaiah this evening, about creation, our role within creation, our relationship to creation, our relationship to God with creation. We have been largely blind and deaf to seeing and reading the Word of God in such a way. And so the voices of indigenous peoples can awaken us to what God has been trying to tell us for thousands of years. And so there's the fundamental question for us as a church, and here I am as a mission coworker. Years ago, they would have called me a missionary, sent around the world 100 years ago to try and plant churches, to convert peoples, to impose a way of life and a cosmovision upon another people. So what is our role in all of this? I was grateful at the last General Assembly to learn that PCUSA is in a process of withdrawing the doctrine of its place in the doctrine of discovery, which of course was the fundamental in suppressing indigenous peoples for hundreds of years, and informed the role of missionaries so many years ago. So that was an initial step that we have taken, but we have so many more steps to take. If we look back at from where we've come as a church in the last 500 years, we've got a tremendous reversal in which we must play a significant role. And I hold myself responsible as a mission co-worker here in Peru. Here I am, a white guy amongst people of color, predominantly indigenous peoples. I represent this last 500 years of the assault upon the land here. So what role can we possibly play? I was somewhat comforted earlier this year. Pope Francis came to visit, and his initial visit here was his first official visit in Peru was actually with indigenous peoples, and it was not for him to speak, rather it was for him to listen, and to listen to their struggles of the assault from the mining and oil industries upon their land. The next step, we need to be better listeners of our indigenous friends around the world. And we need to be better accompaniers in the resistance, how to stand alongside on the road when they are standing in the face of the powers and principalities in the world today. Those who are the powers that are here to represent the industries that are attacking our earth and ultimately sustaining a certain lifestyle that many of us have fallen into. But I want to highlight the very literal steps that you are taking. There is something very significant about what you're doing. And it's not just me here in Peru. There are others around the world who are paying attention to what you're doing, and they will be paying attention to what the General Assembly decides to do in just a couple weeks. I am incredibly proud to be a part of a denomination that will support voices and actions like yours. And to be honest, I think your actions harken back to certain steps taken here in Peru 500 years ago, and even before. The legend of Atahualpa, and I want to end with the legend of Los Chasquis. Los Chasquis were the glue that held the Inca Empire together. They were, for lack of a better word, messengers. And they walked, or oftentimes ran, from one point in the empire to another point to carry a message. They would run 20 miles at 15,000 feet above sea level. And they had, as the legend goes, in one hand, they would have a conch shell, which upon arrival to their destination, they would blow it loudly to announce, "Here I am, and I've got a message." And in the other hand, they would be carrying a quipu. And the quipu was the message. It was a series of ropes and knots, because the Incas didn't have a written language. But also, many people still didn't know how to read the knots. The knots carried the message. To this day, anthropologists still cannot decipher the code of the quipu. But the Chasquis could. The Chasquis knew how to read the knots. And so they would run from one place to another and present the message and interpret it. They would help the folks understand what the knots meant. They played this critical role of keeping the entire empire together and informed. I think you're kind of like modern day Chasquis. You are marching, walking from one place to another, My hope is that when you get there, you blow your conch shell as loud as you can so that everyone knows you are there and everyone is ready to hear your message. Because the message you are bringing needs to be deciphered. You're not just coming with some facts and some information. Ultimately, you're coming with the Spirit. You're coming with a more profound message that many of us around the world, particularly in the U.S. and in the church, have not been able to hear or understand for many centuries. You have a very delicate task of not just presenting numbers, not just presenting evidence, but presenting a message of God that we so desperately need to hear today. And so I am grateful for this sacrifice that you are making, because it is a sacrifice, a physical sacrifice, a sacrifice of time, a sacrifice of resources, many other sacrifices that you could name. And you're doing it on behalf of people around the world, and really all of us, who are dependent on a harmonious relationship with this creation that God has gifted us with. And so I close by thanking you, a profound thanks from me, from my brothers and sisters here in Peru, from Mother Earth, or Pachamama, because what you're doing is important and it is necessary. Thank you.
Jed, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for everything that you shared.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Pastor Larry to offer our prayer for the evening.
Let's be joined in prayer. Gracious creating God, Creator who was and is and will be, we give you thanks for this wonderful planet that you have made. We give you thanks for all that is in and on it to sustain life. And we give you thanks for life itself, especially our life, who you breathed in your Spirit, that we might know you, follow you, love you, and use what you have given us to help you sustain life where we are. We ask for your forgiveness when we have misused this great, the assets of this great planet. We ask that your Holy Spirit will enter into all of us and give us holy wisdom as to your plan, as to how we should use it. I give you thanks for this group that surrounds me tonight, that has allowed us to offer hospitality in the name of Jesus Christ. And I pray for their safety. I pray for their joy in doing this. I pray for their blisters, that they will heal. I pray for Jed, that he will continue to serve you, that he and his wife will serve you in Peru and help us to understand where we are, what's going on. Thank you for the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship and their witness. And I pray, Lord, that you will go with them as they get to the General Assembly, and that people will see your Holy Spirit at work in and through them. Lord, Jed told us that we needed to be better listeners, and where appropriate, where needed, that we also stand in resistance. And so I pray tonight that you will bless each of us with the wisdom of that understanding. And when and where possible, we pray that we will be like the Los Chaquis, and that we will blow our conch shells, and we will help, and we will instruct people around and through the knots, that we will understand better and serve you better in this great creation that you have made. Now we give you praise and thanks for the evening. I pray good rest upon the group that's around me, and continued joy in their walk and service. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. The peace of the earth be with you, the peace of the heavens too. The peace of the rivers be with you, the peace of the oceans too. Keep peace falling over you. God's peace growing in you. Amen. Let us go in peace.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Jed. Thank you, Colleen. And Camp Hanover.
Bless Colleen in the camp.
Yeah.
Good night.